Tonight, Jeff continues his travels with U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey to discover where poetry lives, this time to her native Mississippi and ending with a march in Selma, Alabama.
There is a balm in the Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul.
It was a journey of memory, including the painful one of the killing of Medgar Evers in the driveway of his Jackson, Mississippi home in 1963.
To me, you're standing on hallowed ground.
On this day, his widow, Merle Evers Williams, daughter Rena, and others paid honor.
This one man gave his blood to help free not just a people, but a nation. We're more than grateful.
It was also a journey of language, the power of words to move a nation.
Can I have your attention?
The annual Congressional Civil Rights Pilgrimage was founded 14 years ago by the Faith and Policy Institute and civil rights leader Congressman John Lewis to commemorate key events from the era and bring politicians from both sides of the aisle together with activists from then and now.
I write about...
This year, Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey and I joined in for what turned out to be a deeply personal experience for her. Natasha grew up in Mississippi, the daughter of a black mother and white father.
I felt like I grew up sort of in the intersections between Civil War history, civil rights history, and then that moment into which I was born. And it is the scaffolding that holds up all the things that I'm concerned about as a poet. I think for me, a commitment to social justice always undergirds my poems.
We're now headed to worship service at the...
Over 3 days, more than 100 participants traveled by bus through the Mississippi Delta. Clarksdale, Ruleville, Money, on to Jackson, and then into Alabama for a march in Selma. In Jackson, they visited Tougaloo College, an historically black liberal arts school founded by Christian missionaries for freed slaves.
People gathered here after the assassination of Medgar Evers.
There they heard from Reverend Edwin King, one of the organizers of the 1964 Freedom Summer, who delivered the sermon at the funeral for civil rights activists James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, who were murdered nearby that summer.
It seemed the angels had gathered.
Natasha read one of her poems titled Incident, based on a childhood experience of witnessing a cross burning on her family's lawn. Here's an excerpt.
We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened, the charred grass now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross, trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil.
Afterwards, Natasha and Reverend King talked about poetry's role in the movement.
Do you think of poetry? I think I certainly do. See it as another form of sacred language.
It's there, and in the music of the freedom songs, we could hold on to each other. We could express our fears together that we could never quite say aloud, I'm afraid, but I'll go ahead.
Right.
But we could sing, we're not afraid, because we were. So the music is a poetic form of telling the truth.
In Jackson, down the street from the state capitol, there was a service at the Galloway United Methodist Church, at one time a segregationist congregation, which lost many members when it finally opened its doors to blacks in 1967.
Welcome to Jackson.
House Majority Leader Eric Cantor was one of the Republican representatives who'd made the trip, in his case, for a second time.
I think in all increases the sensitivity for all of us to never ever again allow something like this and the hatred that produced the civil rights movement, for the struggle for justice, to make sure that we continue that fight and not ever allow that hatred to come back in.
The state of Mississippi, in fact, is currently building 2 museums about its history with a focus on civil rights. But at a dinner for the pilgrimage group, former Mississippi Democratic Governor William Winter spoke of more troubled times.
We wasted 20 years, and I apologize to the people of Mississippi for not having asserted more leadership. We white folks owe as much to you and your martyred husband as black folks do, because you freed us too.
The last day of the pilgrimage was spent in Selma, Alabama. One sign of the enormous changes here, Terry Sewell, the first black valedictorian of Selma High, and now the state's first black congresswoman. For her, this trip wasn't so much about memory as legacy.
Old battles are now new again. Progress is always elusive. Yeah. So I think that, it's important that we never forget what happened here on this bridge, and that we are ever vigilant in fighting for the right to vote.
49 years ago, the Brown Chapel served as a starting point for the 1965 Selma to Montgomery marches for voting rights. John Lewis described what would become known as Bloody Sunday, when police used billy clubs and tear gas against the 600 marchers who had crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
I thought I was so dead. I thought I was going to die.
We talked after the service.
I was listening to you inside. You're talking about what happened here 49 years ago. It sounds like it's really fresh memories for you.
There's not any way that I can forget what happened here 49 years ago. It's just as fresh as the morning dew.
Fresh as the morning dew.
Just as fresh as the air we breathe here in Alabama. I grew up not too far from here.
How important was language and words to what happened here and in these marches?
Words meant everything. Mm-hmm. Words, music. Mm-hmm. Without words, without the spoken word, Selma and the movement would have been like a bird without wings.
There were more words and music as this year's pilgrimage concluded with a march over the bridge.
When we first talked about this project, this was the event you first told me about.
Well, for me, it had a lot to do with my own work, my own poems, but in a larger sense, what I think about the necessity for American poetry in general, and that is for a kind of recording of our cultural moment and to record the history of a people.
As the pilgrimage came to an end,
we continued to walk.
John Lewis, on a bullhorn near where he was beaten half a century ago, told the crowd the movement continues today.